Welcome to What's Next, an interview series with some of the technology leaders and investors behind the technology businesses that may define the next century. Today we're talking to Joanna Shields, a tech trailblazer who over her long career has worked on the adoption of new technologies. She's currently the CEO of Precognition, a business helping AI leaders navigate the world of tomorrow. She was previously CEO of Benevolent AI, a listed company applying artificial intelligence to drug discovery. She's had executive roles at companies like Facebook, Google, and Bebo, and she was the first ever Minister for Internet Safety, helping policymakers navigate a complex new world. Today, we talk about her career, what AI leaders need to get right when thinking about building their businesses, and how we accelerate the adoption of these new technologies in a safe and responsible way. So, Joanna, thank you so much for joining us here at What's Next.
Nice to be here.
Look, we could start on so many different points in your incredible career and your role in technology and shaping it, both as a founder and a CEO, as an advisor. But excitingly, you've become a founder again just this year. So perhaps we should start with where we are now. Could you talk to us a little bit about Precognition and what you're doing?
So the idea behind Precognition is over the course of decades of experience, the superpower that I think founders and CEOs have to develop is to anticipate the future. And I think when I look back at careers that my own experiences plus people that I've worked with over time, the thing that resonates with me most is when you can see the future emerge and then you can act and get ahead of it. And that's how big companies are built. And that's where the strong foundational position of securing the market leadership role in an industry, all that comes about that way. So in a world where AI is empowering us to have the wisdom of the ages at the end of a query, how are you as a CEO going to take advantage of all that information at your disposal, but then add that real human element of anticipating the future, and how do you take all of that wisdom and pull it together? And that's really what Precognition is about.
And it feels like we're in this strange world where, yes, we have all these tools at our disposal, but at the same time, the speed of change is accelerating, which kind of makes seeing around the corner even more difficult. So are you seeing pull from people just coming up to you saying, hey, look, we need help to navigate this very changing landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing I do in the morning is already parse through all the information and all the announcements from the day before. Because, of course, we have the advantage here. We have the morning where Silicon Valley happens later in our evenings. And I'm just stunned by the pace and the acceleration that's happening. And I think you can really very easily sort of get lost in your own development bubble and sort of forget what's happening out there. And I think it's really important to access outside resources and talk to people who are aware of what's going on or having those conversations and, tap into that wisdom and make sure that you bring that into your product development. You bring that into how you run your leadership team. And, you have to be aware because the pace is just unprecedented.
Yeah. Well, it feels like everyone's focus has been on AI over the last sort of 18 to 24 months at least. But of course, you started off working in AI much earlier than that. Before your Precognition, you were at Benevolent AI, was CEO there. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Benevolent was doing, once again, relatively early in the game in applying AI in the drug discovery field, and perhaps some of your experiences of being the leader of a deep tech company?
So the way I got into to Benevolent AI was I had been in government for 5.5 years. So I was the first internet safety and security minister anywhere in the world, which is a real nod to our government here because it was an understanding that you needed someone with my skills and experience to be in that role. But one of the things I was doing is it was during the mid 2015 timeframe when there was a lot of effort to radicalize people online, starting with Islamist extremism and then around the far right narratives. And what we were seeing is that these narratives were manipulating young people and people of all ages really to change their views. So you had malign actors sort of influencing the internet with these disinformation campaigns. And so we set out in government at GCHQ, we put up a team to understand the language of extremism online. So it was a very big project that we undertook. So we had huge development teams looking at understanding the language of extremism, and we built classifiers for 8 different types of extremist language. So I had this view, 2014 to 2018, as to how powerful this, AI technology could be in machine learning to understand language. And so I was in a position to, when I saw the founders of Benevolent, to say, look, we could actually enable scientists to have access to all the world's biomedical information, to understand and reason across it and make better scientific decisions, which was the whole concept behind the company. So for me, it was like a natural transition of understanding language models, understanding other, advanced AI models, and then putting those to work in the service of science. And that was just an incredible experience.
Yeah, and obviously you were early in that field, but the use of transformer models now, LLMs and others, in the scientific field has just accelerated rapidly, right? So obviously Benevolent's been working on that, but if you look at what AlphaFold and subsequently Isomorphic Labs are working on, and many other, use cases in science, it's kind of, it seems to be like one of the less reported areas of advancement, because we're all so excited about the new capabilities of LLMs when it's in a interface that we can use on our laptops. But actually, if you see what's going on in scientific discovery at the moment, drug discovery, I think it's just absolutely astonishing as well. And we've been interviewing some of the founders working in that space who are more excited than ever, I think, about the capabilities at their fingertips.
I think when you look at certainly in disease and understanding, the human body is the most complex organism. I think it's 45 trillion cells or something in the human body. So trying to understand what's going on in any complex multifactorial disease is really a complicated task. So the idea that, AlphaFold is one data type, if you will, but with the latest large language models and these new domain-specific, sort of deep domain-specific models, you're able to incorporate hundreds of different types of data. So you can have clinical trial data combined with, chemical structures like you have in AlphaFold. Plus, you can have patent data and all the clinical trials that were ever published and all the research papers, all inside that decision matrix as you make that next choice in the R&D process. And I think that's an incredibly empowering opportunity for science.
And obviously, as well as being early on the applications of AI in science, your role in tech safety, in influencing and shaping government policy around the adoption but the responsible use of machine learning was pioneering. As you said, you were the first minister of that type in the world. And the UK government continues, I think, to lead on some of these topics. Are you optimistic then about government's role in, not just making sure that we get safe AI, but also, the other side of that, making sure we adopt these tools, hopefully to raise productivity and improve health outcomes and everything else they can do?
Yeah, I'm starting to. I really believe now is an empowering moment in the relationship between government and businesses. I think the government recognizes the need to nurture this incredibly important area, but doing it in a safe and responsible way. Looking back, the phase of launching, social media platforms, safety and accountability were not, a part of that as much as they should have been at the outset. And even today, you can have the safest AI, but if a malign actor creates a deepfake video of a world leader and it gets distribution and amplified via the algorithms on social media, it's not that it was created that is the problem as much as it's the amplification of it and the distribution of it. So we still have big challenges in terms of, keeping people safe from malign actors online. But, I feel like the government has we had a difficult period of time. Brexit was a real transition for this country. And I think we're now getting back to where we're, deep into nurturing startups and recognizing the importance of that. The AI Safety Summit was a good, step in the right direction. The Korean Summit is this week, and I think that this is really important, that safety is an important part of this, and that the government is focused on the models and validating the foundational models and ensuring that they meet certain requirements. But the other thing we have to focus on is not necessarily just safety, but how do we empower? I think that AI in terms of citizen services is a huge area. You could completely remake the way government works today if government is ambitious enough to make those investments.
And so obviously I'm an early stage investor. I'm on the side of the startups innovation. You've had, been the leader of many startups. So do you worry at all about some of the criticism that actually governments might be overstepping at the moment and reaching too deep on the safety side, because that could kill the fortunes of very small businesses who don't know how to navigate a highly regulated world where there's lots of well-paid lobbyists as well on the other side of it, and instead favors the incumbents?
I think government needs to recognize that the AI community, from the largest companies to the smallest companies, are really leaning into this. And I see a very different commitment to safety and accountability in AI companies today than I saw in the social media wave. And I think that people do take it responsibly. They are on the side of liberal democracy. They want to see this as an empowering force in society. They are very responsible in their actions. And so I think we need to give them a bit of a break. And I think we need to take that as a given. And, of course, focus on it, but also don't put onerous requirements on them to where they can't meet that. And only the big guys can comply with those regulations. I think we have to be very careful not to push too far in that area, because small companies cannot, dedicate a team of people to have an evaluation on a frequent basis. It's just not realistic. And even, companies that are sort of mid-stage are struggling to keep up with some of the requirements.
And do you feel at the moment that policymakers and officials, elected representatives, are cognizant of that we're not just heading down a road where it's all going to be regulation built around sort of what Google and Meta and others can navigate? Because obviously it's one of our concerns here is not only do we have safe AI, but we have a competition around AI, which is also probably one of the requirements for it to be safe.
Yeah, I'm concerned a little bit. I think that this is such an important time, and investments in this space at the moment need to be free. Like, people need to be able to build their businesses and to feel that the government has their back. I'm slightly concerned that we're over-indexing.
Yeah. And sort of on the other side, obviously government plays one role in stimulating this new world for entrepreneurship in deep tech like AI. The other side, that's investors, right? You've obviously worked with a broad range of investors, including ourselves at Balderton. And
two opportunities.
Twice, yeah. And hopefully more, who knows? When you were building Bebo, when you were building Bebo, there was a different world for venture then. Then going on to be CEO of Benevolent, which is in a very deep tech and niche.
Actually, there was Google and Facebook in
between. Yes, yeah, which I think were well financed enough.
It was Google, then Bebo,
then Facebook. Yeah. But in that transition between building sort of a more traditional consumer application company, social media company, arguably one of the first social media companies in Bebo, and then going on to be CEO of Benevolent, which is obviously a very deep technical area. Did you find that the investor base got smaller? Were there the investors there who really got the opportunity here? Because it's not just, we need entrepreneurs and we need good governance around it and we need good policy, but we also need investors who grok the space, right? Do they exist?
I think you have to define one of the most important things you do as an entrepreneur is, I came up through the product development ranks. So I was a product manager. So I always think of the world in terms of the product and the market fit. And how do you capitalize on that? And how do you run for that sort of open opportunity? And I think if you are focused on what you're trying to do and you attract investors that understand that market, I think it takes care of itself. I think the problem is when companies become too diffuse, they get atomized. There's so much opportunity, they don't know where to focus or where to aim their efforts. And like, for instance, in the Benevolent case, the company was a developer of technology, but also started developing the drugs. And that's a very different type of thing. In fact, I think that the company really would have benefited from splitting the two, because at some stage, the tech becomes this mature platform that is empowering for all of the industry. And that's a very different business model and attracts a very different type of investor. And it's an AI kind of focused company. And then when you get to where you're developing a drug, it's a biopharma investor, and it's a very different model. So I think you have to be focused as to where you're aiming, and be very, deliberate about that to attract the right investors who understand your trajectory and are going to stick with you the entire journey.
And as you mentioned, your background in product management and then leadership and executive roles in startups, but also in some of the biggest companies in the world, has led you into some really interesting spaces. But now you're working, and both in your previous role and I guess now at Precognition, you're working with individuals who may have more of an academic, technical, or researcher background. How have you found that transition? How have you found working with individuals who may have come straight out the lab or have predominantly been in academics versus sort of people who've had the product management, software engineering, and sales experience of sort of more consumer software applications?
Well, the unifying theme for me in working with entrepreneurs is there isn't a scenario or situation that I haven't had some experience with. I mean, when you get to 35 plus years of doing this, you've kind of seen it all. It comes at you in different ways, but that's what I mean about precognition and understanding, the power of human intelligence on top of all of this, incredibly, machine curated intelligence that we're witnessing and experiencing. I think it's very important that sort of human expertise comes out. And what I find is working with entrepreneurs, it doesn't matter what, area they're in. Like, first of all, you have to be intellectually curious, and learning about a new area of tech is just, I can't help it. I geek out, and I can't wait to get, to learn more about what they're up to. But once you understand the fundamentals of the business, you can bring that wisdom of, the past experience to the table. And I think it's been really beneficial.
I think people say LLMs bring internet scale data to the fore, and now Precognition's bringing Shield scale data from your 35-year career to people, which I think is a huge benefit. And you seem incredibly excited now about what's around the corner, and despite sort of a very storied career at some of the most successful companies in the world. So, what are you excited about at the moment? What's driving this passion?
Well, I'm excited about this phase of human empowerment. And, I'm not a doom and gloom. I don't worry as much about the existential risk. I think Eric Schmidt said last week that, he thinks AI is underhyped. I agree with him. I feel like the potential is just enormous. And I feel like it's such an empowering moment for humanity. When I think about like the last 2 decades, it was all about STEM. And there was a whole group of young people that were left behind that didn't have skills in science and math, who really weren't able to participate in in those revolutions. But now you have this, I call it the revenge of the right brain thinker. There's a whole group of people that were were kind of cut out of the startup world, and their skills now are very important. Their skills of, reasoning and understanding and writing and communicating and, more that nuanced human process, almost like a liberal arts education, becomes important again, because a lot of the hard things are being done better by machine learning and AI, right? I mean, it writes the best code, and it's about stitching that together in a way and bringing human intelligence into that, and bringing different types of thinking in will get us to better quality products. So I think it's quite an exciting time, and I feel like everybody's involved now, whereas in the past, some people were really left out. If you didn't know how to code, you really felt like you missed out on the last couple of decades. And I think that's changing now.
So you see a sort of a big growth in sort of jobs, I guess, and and the demand for skills being more in how we interact with these AI models in whatever format that may be.
That's the premium.
Yeah.
Is the human interaction with it. How do you get the most out of that? How do you make that experience a thought partner for you? How do you challenge it? I use it constantly, because it refines my thinking, and it's just getting better and better. I use them all. Like, I play with them all. I mean, it's just extraordinary. The level of empowerment. Like, I used to have to use an entire team to build a presentation. I can do it myself in like no time, and it's perfect. You know what I mean? It's just, it's incredible.
Well, they used to say sort of the skill or the art of being a product manager was translating what the customer wanted to what the engineer needed to hear. Right? That was the job. And I guess your argument now is, well, that's an even more necessary skill, because on the engineering side, we've got great engineers, but also product managers, whoever they may be, you, I, or anyone else listening, can now use these tools to create products as well, at a much faster rate or lower barrier to entry than they may have before. So with that in mind, so when you think about the kind of founders you think will have an impact going forward, and the founders you want to work with going forward, so what are the skill sets you think they're going to need more than perhaps they needed in the last decade?
Well, I think there's a wave now of deep domain specific AI that I think, in mission critical applications, in science and areas like that. I think where, traditionally a scientist would, publish a paper and that was the end of their contribution. And then, it was up to the rest of the world to sort of take it forward. I see scientists as being able to actually develop their own companies now, because there's, the potential is there. And so developing domain specific, deep domain specific knowledge on top of the foundational models, I think is a huge opportunity and a really powerful wave that's coming.
And there's an area there which will, once again, I guess, hit on the edges of the state, right? Because if you're doing sort of some areas of very deep domain specialism, whether it's sort of energy or transportation or healthcare, we previously on this series spoke to a food entrepreneur. All of these things are regulated for good reason, right? There's obviously, we need good policy around that. So do you also foresee an increasing interaction between these new technologies and what policymakers have to be on top of in order to allow entrepreneurs to be effective?
Well, I think it used to be people, companies would say our data is our most valuable asset, and they didn't want to share that data. And I think, it was proprietary and they wanted to keep it to themselves. But I think now, the contribution of data to the large language models has been obviously, transformative. And I think what companies now have to see is that they have to realize that their data has to be part of this broader sort of vast, information that you draw upon to make decisions. And we've got to be less proprietary about our data, but that also means that you've got to respect GDPR and privacy. And I think there's a lot of, challenging questions there. But once we get over that as a society and we start to really leverage all of that information that we've been collecting for generations, I think we're going to see, a real change. Like, I think citizen service is a really powerful example. There's so much potential to rework and redo how we interact with institutions and government.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge area.
You believe government will be able to open up more data sets?
They have to. It's a must. It's absolutely essential.
And I think obviously during your period at Facebook and Google, it was an incredibly exciting time to be there. They expanded very, very quickly. And they were very open organizations, right? I think Facebook and Google have both added hugely to sort of open source software and sharing of ideas. So one of the criticisms of certainly what's happened at Google recently and other AI labs has been they've shut shop a little bit. They've actually been a lot quieter, because suddenly what was sort of a fun collaborative thing, working on AI together, has become an existential threat to the business. So do you think that's a wise strategic choice, or do you think this is a short-term thing and hopefully people will come to a new optimum relationship with each other going forward?
I do worry that the concentration and the power in the hands of very few companies, I think that's a concern. That's why I think that there should be this mass rush to sort of develop these domain-specific, deep learning models on top of those foundational models as a real value add for companies and entrepreneurs. I think that's really important. I think this kind of closed lockdown thing is a bit of a concern. And I think, we have to keep our eye on it. But then open source is, has its own challenges as well. So, I think this thing it's into the wild now, and we just need to come to terms with it, and we need to embrace it, and we need to think through, the challenges and the opportunities and make the right calls. Whether you're a business or whether you're government, you have to be in the game. I think enterprises have been really slow. Like, these industries are saying, well, we have a co-pilot. Wow. Our our customers can talk to a co-pilot. It's not a great experience yet. Do you know what I mean? But what are you going to do beyond that? Like, how are you going to transform the way you work and how you communicate with your customers, your partners? How are you going to change your supply chain? What are you going to do about, I think if an enterprise isn't looking at that in a deep level right now, I think it's going to be an issue.
Yeah. Going back to the sort of opportunity set, and especially for those people who are thinking about starting a business here, you started your career in Silicon Valley, if I'm right.
In the late 80s.
In the late 80s. Amazing. I mean, that once again.
I'm talking to entrepreneurs now who weren't born when I went to. It's so funny. I just think it's funny. Like, they think they're talking to their mom, but then I'm talking about the things they talk about, which is very strange. Although I am advising my son, he has an AI startup. So.
Oh, wow. Okay. So you really
that's
are
really complicated. Yeah.
If you can navigate that relationship successfully, I think you're going to be okay with the other entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
But do you still, obviously you were there in the late 80s and you've traveled around with your career, but often worked for businesses like Facebook and Google who've had their epicenter in Silicon Valley still. Do you think that people need to be in Silicon Valley to be that level of successful still?
There's something about being in the game in Silicon Valley. There's kind of a lived experience there. I think, I don't want to put too much emphasis on it, but I think it does help a company to have a presence there of some sort. It's just the way it is. But it's that kinetic energy that you get. Like, I feel like now that we had the really weird time of the pandemic where everybody was doing everything at home. And I think now getting back into the office, having that sort of, the inspiration of talking to another person and then that leading to another conversation is really important as part of the process of innovation. I think we lost that for a couple of years and we're getting it back. But I think a touchstone in Silicon Valley is important, but a touchstone in London is also important. A touchstone in Singapore, the UAE. There's so many hubs now where you have a lot of dynamic activity. And I think London really has still an opportunity to be one of those.
Yeah. I mean, we're fortunate to be, obviously we invest across Europe and many of the companies we start investing on go global, right? Many of them eventually set up hubs in Silicon Valley or New York or Boston or the UAE or Singapore, across Europe, across the world. One of the things that we believe strongly in is that value of serendipity of bringing people together. One of the things that's probably changed over the last decade is being in the game, being competitive with the very top peers globally. You can do by being online to some degree, right? Because you can be part of the online debate, you can be part of the online culture, whether it's starting off in a niche Reddit forum or in an academic journal, which is global, or whether it's being in those X discussions or wherever those discussions are happening on Meta or Google, I think means you can still break into that global top tier without having to be in Silicon Valley the whole time. But as you say, it's still a powerful place to be.
I just think you have to have a touchstone. I don't think you have to be there.
And do you feel entrepreneurs outside of Silicon Valley have the right level of aspiration to be competitive with those kind of world-leading companies?
So one of the reasons I think it's important to have a touchstone in Silicon Valley is because in Silicon Valley, people believe they can do anything. And I think in the UK and other countries around the world, there's this sort of more of a shy approach where much more humble, like you don't want to boast about yourself, but there's something about being around people who believe that anything is possible, that is kinetic, and it drives you to feel that way about yourself. And I think that learning from that experience and realizing, how a Silicon Valley entrepreneur thinks about things is a really important lesson for European entrepreneurs, because we tend to, have a lower aspiration, not because we're not ambitious here, but because, we're just not exposed to that level of funding and possibility. And I think that the one thing about going to the Valley is you open your eyes that you can actually change the world with the right amount of funding and the right amount of investment and support. And you can build and scale a company that is the next giant in an industry. And I think that's really important.
And having worked in those types of organizations and worked with the leadership at Google and Facebook and elsewhere, are there things that you take away from those experiences and characteristics you saw that you want entrepreneurs to adopt and replicate today?
I love it when I have the opportunity to share with a young entrepreneur an experience I had at Google or Facebook in the early stages. Because, when you're in the early stages of of a high growth company like that, you when there's a couple hundred people, it's a very different experience to when it's tens of thousands of people. And that sort of closed sort of time where, where the magic actually came together, and you knew that what great looked like, and everybody was moving towards that. And, a lot of it comes from the leaders and the founders, but it also comes from the organization you set up around the leaders and the founders. Everyone in that team knew what great looked like, and that's why we were able to take it to the next stage. And I think the other important lesson is whatever got you to this point isn't enough to take you to that next growth vector. And I think, being able to bring that wisdom and knowledge of each of those stages to where you're scaling and building, a world-class company, I think is just invaluable to entrepreneurs.
Once again, you started very early on in Silicon Valley, but you didn't start off as a founder. You didn't leave university and go straight into founding a business.
No.
You've got some experience first and as a product manager and elsewhere. Do you think that's still helpful for people to go in and get some work experience in another organization? Or do you think the opportunity is so vast now that you should be going into academics and getting that deep domain expertise?
I think it's interesting because when I came up into this industry, it was late 80s, and I started in a company, but it was a startup company. And, we went public I was there almost 10 years, but I had advanced. I started as a product manager and moved all the way up to VP of a chip manufacturing business, which was a big deal, but it took 10 years. I don't think anyone expects their career for it to take that long now. Everyone's so impatient. And I don't think necessarily you have to go through the school of hard knocks anymore. I think you can be a successful entrepreneur right out of school if you have the right if you get the right advice, you get the right support from, an investment firm like Balderton, you have that kind of foundation, and they can help you guys can help that entrepreneur build the team around them that fills the gaps. So I don't think you necessarily have to. I don't want to be that old person who says, well, you should have to go through the process. That was quite an old fashioned time. But I remember always being the youngest person in the room. And then suddenly you wake up one day and you're not, You've been through so many iterations of this. And I've seen these waves come and go, but I've never seen anything like what's happening today. I mean, I was at, like you were talking earlier about the phases at Google and Facebook. When I was at Google, we were ingesting all the world's information to make all these products like maps and books and, video, which became actually required. YouTube became like such a powerful concept. But, before that, it was just, the search query and a basic web, And now we're at that phase where it's the ingesting of all the world's information, and then that much more advanced ability to ask and get answered a really complex multifactorial question is incredible. Who would have thought that you could, pose this really complex, deep, domain specific question to a large language model and get such high quality results. I mean, I'm just blown away.
Yeah, some of the emerging capabilities that we're seeing, people didn't expect from the approach to these models has been kind of astounding. And so when you think about the types of founders who will be successful in this space, and I guess the characteristics they may have, what in this period of vast change, what do you look for when choosing a CEO to work with, or if you're thinking about things like what do you look at when you're assessing whether or not a CEO is going to be successful? Are there certain characteristics that keep coming up?
Well, I'm just impressed with the CEOs I'm meeting now and how sort of worldly they are and how humble and grounded. It's a really interesting time. I think this new sort of group of people that are emerging and leading some of the most important companies of our time are very thoughtful, very good people. And I feel incredibly optimistic. And I think it's important to seek them out because there are many of them. There are many people that we should be investing in and supporting because they think big and they believe in the potential of this technology to transform society. And I always think that a person's ethics and their, the way they conduct themselves you'll know in that first sort of experience how they will be as a partner. And I'm super optimistic. There's some really good people out there.
Yeah. It's kind of a weird thing that we're in a period now where it's actually slightly less venture capital across the board over the last 3 years. But if you were working in sort of training models 3 or 4 years ago and working on the very cutting edge outside of a handful of companies, it was really hard to raise. So actually, by default, you had to be passionate about it. You had to be a true believer. And so in a way, the people we're seeing now at the forefront of this field are the people who were true believers, who weren't just in it to make a quick buck. And inevitably, the bubble in tech in 2020, 2021 perhaps did incentivize some people to go down the quick buck route. Don't blame them, but it's a very different motivation than some of the people who've been working on the next generation of machine learning and pushing us through into different domains and collecting data and now building astonishingly successful models. Those people generally have been at it for a while, and that means they probably are longer term, bigger picture thinkers, which hopefully means they'll go on to be able to create really meaningful businesses.
The vision and the philosophy behind it, I think, is coming through in a lot of these companies. I'm impressed.
Yeah. And when you think about what you want to do with Precognition, where do you hope it will be in a few years' time? You spent a lot of time talking about sort of all these exciting founders building things which will be impactful. What do you hope to be working on in sort of 4 or 5 years' time?
Well, I just want to be in the game. I think I've never, like I said, I've been in this for decades, but I've never seen the type of, transformative potential. And I'm a big believer that, there is a way in which society as a whole can benefit and that we can elevate everyone in the process. And that's why I left Facebook and went into government, because I am truly, really believe that you have to give back at certain phases. And I think this is a phase where, these models are free. Like, how much of it, I pay for everything, but you don't have to get a good experience. And I think that's really important. And I think that democratization of access to information and people anywhere in the world in any language can experience that. I think that will elevate humanity in a time where we have so many challenges globally, navigating the political context of the moment. Try to see that positive potential and try to find a way that we as humans can bring everybody together and sort of live better and live a higher order life. Let a lot of the mundane stuff go to the machine learning and let it do its job and empower people to have more, a better life as individuals and then as society.
That's quite a mission statement for your work over the next 5 to 10 years, but I believe you can do it. And if you were to leave people listening who may want to start an entrepreneurial adventure with one piece of advice?
Wow, that's a really good question. It comes back to precognition. It's about trusting your gut instinct and understanding that you have, you're an expert. You've built a business, you've come to this stage, and you have all the tools around you. Now you have AI and machine learning models that give you, access to all the world's wisdom, but your unique skills and your expertise and your wisdom is really important in this process, and you need to trust your gut.
Baroness Shields, thank you so much for your time today. I think that it is really reassuring to talk to someone who's worked in some of the most important technology businesses in the world, some phenomenally successful startups and government, and to come out of all of that with quite a positive view of how we can navigate what you yourself said was one of the most exciting periods of technological change you've ever seen, which, given your experience in the Valley and all of those different institutions, should hopefully give a lot of heart to anyone thinking about starting a business today. And we really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.